So we had somebody vote last podcast who was the draw to this podcast. Me, you, or the background music.
I forgot we asked that question.
The vote was the background music.
That can't be real. That can't be the real answer.
That's what Charlie commented.
So does he just stop watching after it's over?
Probably.
Nice. We have to keep it going the whole time then.
Yeah, I can do that.
Okay.
That doesn't distract me at all. Do you know back in the day when I first started preaching, at 16, I would, there's a song, there was like a background song, and I'd be in my room and I'd turn it on and it just looped.
Mm-hmm.
I turned it on for two reasons. One, so my family didn't hear me preach.
Mm-hmm.
This feels weird. The
Yeah.
second reason, it's like, it was inspiring. You like preach better with like this like great soundtrack behind
so
you.
like practice?
Yeah, I
What
used to
song was it?
practice. In fact, the first 2 years of our church plan, I still practiced every Saturday night.
That makes sense.
And in some ways, I stopped doing that, but I think there's value in it. Like, so, not every time, but sometimes I'm like, oh man, that second service was better. Like, because I don't want to say the first service was a practice, but I said these things out loud and thought some other connecting ideas and whatnot. So
Do you go over it at all? It's like Saturday night, Sunday morning? Like,
I pray through it on Sunday morning on a walk.
Okay.
I wake up pretty early still on Sundays and do my whole rhythm, read my Bible. I actually have one book I only read on Sundays. It's The Imitation of Christ by Thomas A. Kempis. I do that, and then I overlook my notes, make any last minor tweaks. I feel like you don't care. You're like, this was way
That's
more
not what
than
I
I
asked,
asked
but-
for.
Okay.
And then
No, I care.
And then I go out and I try to see how much I kind of pray it to God, and I try to see how much I remember it just without notes, which is kind of helpful.
Yeah.
Then
So
it feels like
do-
you have a good grasp of it.
That's kind of practicing it.
Yeah. The only thing, one thing I did actually do this weekend that I don't normally ever do is I practiced my story. Like,
Oh, yeah.
how do I best capture,
The milk story?
not the milk story. I didn't practice that. No, my journey towards generosity.
Yeah.
Like how, it was really me thinking out loud. Because you know this, in my sermon notes, when I give a story, that's when I'm not line by line at all. But I'm like, eventually I need to like say it out loud to make sure I know where I'm going. So
Yeah. What is it? H.B. Charles says to write yourself clear every time. So when you're going to preach a sermon, you have to write. That was the big mistake I made when I first started, was I would bullet point because I hated manuscripting.
yeah.
And sometimes I preach manuscript style. Sometimes I always have a manuscript.
The question is, are you reading it or not?
Yeah, because writing it out forces you to see the flow and how the ideas connect. Because then when you
Yeah.
do that, you're like, oh, that doesn't make sense. Why am I going here?
This
Like,
subjectively,
yeah.
this transition's awkward.
which is super important when you're telling a story about your own life, because you know how it goes.
exactly.
So you have to make sure that it makes sense to the people who didn't experience it the way you did.
I'm assuming they'll get it because in my mind it all
It makes
flows.
sense. Yeah.
Yes. So those stories, I'm like, that's a good thing to practice out loud.
Yeah.
So, well, I guess the podcast is over because people have left.
Bye, Charlie. Please stay.
Or go. I'm just our retention, it's already 3 minutes in. So if you stayed this long, sounds good to me.
You're in.
Yeah. Because I guess a lot of people, they don't listen to podcasts very long. Actually, or the whole thing.
Don't you go to a podcast to listen to?
That's true. You just kind of,
You expect it to be more than.
that's why my phone, sometimes the time on phone looks terrible because it's podcast.
Your
It's like an
screen time.
hour-long podcast. So it's
Yeah.
like, shoot, that doesn't look great.
Yeah.
It looks like I was doing this for an hour. Instead, I
I
was
know.
cleaning, doing dishes, vacuuming, sweeping while listening to a podcast.
We used to have our baby monitor on all night, and so it was like 14 hours or something.
With your
crazy.
phone?
Yeah. I would have it. I plugged it in and just
That
had it
makes
on,
sense.
and it was like, oh my gosh.
That's so funny that, so our first child is 9. So 10 years ago when we were prepping to have a child, it wouldn't connect to a phone. So
Yeah.
we had the old school,
The actual baby monitor.
so I was
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
you have it on your phone? Like that
Yeah, it's
just
great.
shows.
It's a security
age.
app, so I don't know if it was intentionally for baby monitors, but it worked.
We do that now too. What's great because there's movement, you get dinged. It's great. Well, today is episode 1. Talk about not flowing? Like, how did we just cover so many random things?
Isn't that good though? Do people like banter? I don't know.
Where are we gonna go? We don't even know. Let's talk about the overview. Also, I do like how we talk normal. You listen to Christian podcasts and it's like, okay, in today's, like, it's just, there's just like the news anchor voice.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
I was about to
yeah.
do it, but I won't.
Yeah.
There's like a Christian podcast voice.
You put on, you're on. You put on your thing. I don't know. Yeah.
Praise the Lord for them, but I just can't do that.
Yeah.
Overview. Do you have the overview that you wrote?
Yes.
What was yesterday's message about? This is episode 1 of season 6, generosity.
Yeah. Okay. Fewer sins are as deep rooted and hard to detect as greed. Not many of us would admit to being greedy or materialistic, but greed, by default, lives inside each one of us. Jesus makes this clear in Luke 11 when he confronts the Pharisees who hid their greed from others and projected generosity instead. While they appeared holy and generous on the outside, Jesus calls out their inner attachment to money. A few chapters later, Jesus makes his criticism of greed even more clear. To ignore the greed that lives inside all of us makes it impossible to truly love God and others. To Jesus, greed is a poison. And yet, Jesus offers us a solution. The only antidote to the invisible poison of greed is the visible practice of generosity. Our goal is to become disciples, not donors, who practice generosity as a way to keep our greed away from our souls. We redirect our worship towards God by holding our money and wealth so loosely that we give freely because we trust in the God of abundance.
So, long overview.
Wordy.
Great.
The benediction was long too, wasn't it? When you were
Yeah.
doing it, was it? Yeah.
Do you write those?
Yeah. Most of them. Sometimes I find them online.
I don't understand how your brain works.
Sometimes
And you act like it's easy.
well, no. Sometimes they're really hard. Sometimes I will like adapt them from online, things like that. One of them, I won't say which, did come from an AI source that I edited. So come at me, I guess. I don't know. It's been blessed and sanctified.
I'm
so.
here saying this is rooted in the scriptures.
It is.
And then
it is. That was from
and Chat GPT.
Well, we don't know which one I used. I use it sometimes if I don't know how to start, or like if
Yeah.
I can't find one based on that, I'll say like, hey, write a whatever, and then I'll kind of edit
They're
it.
never going to view our benedictions the same. We should have kept that quiet.
You can cut this part out. I think that's probably bad. Yeah, I knew you didn't want the answer to that question.
No.
Most of them I do write. Most of them I do write, or I find online or something like that.
So I write the sermon typically, and then Caleb, not with AI, and
So I write my sermons.
and then what's terrible though is I hit the limit and I go, I don't know. I don't know how to overview this. I just have the whole 35 minutes in my head. I can't figure out a 30-second version. So I just send you the notes on a Thursday, and then on Friday, boom, yeah, that's that totally makes sense. Awesome.
I haven't used AI for the overviews. I don't think.
I tried to do that.
Yeah, it comes out kind of clunky.
It's
I think I
just
tried to.
Really strange. And it always says, and I can't figure out a way to do a better prompt where it says, the speaker says, I'm like, no, just make this I don't want to say, well, the speaker says this. Anyways, we're getting off track. So we're going to talk about generosity. And in some ways, you can kind of package this first week. One way to package it is it goes back to like what Piper calls as Christian hedonism. It's almost selfish to in a good way. It's very self-serving. Again, those words, but to be generous, like leads to a really good life is what I'm trying to get to. So in a weird way, to lose your life is how you find it, is what Jesus is saying. This is like a very abundant thing to do. So one reason to give is it actually does lead to happiness. But if that's your motivation, then it's not right. But it does lead to it. You know what I'm saying?
That's okay. Well, I think you could take that too far with any practice. Like
Yeah.
the means, the end goal, as we've say time and time again, is to be formed into a person of love who reflects the grace and the gospel to others. And so like there are a lot of things holding us back from doing that, from growing in our faith, but also to sharing the love of Christ with others, both inside and outside the church. And one of those things that you argue in this that Jesus argues and that you kind of took and ran with is greed is one of the most dangerous, sort of poisonous, invisible, difficult to detect vices that all of us are kind of born with.
Yeah.
That prevent us from becoming those kinds of people and living that out. And so generosity is a practice to rewire our souls away from greed and towards others and worship to God and all that stuff.
And one way we would describe a greedy person is somebody who's driven by the fear of scarcity, and that further drives them into the arms of the love of money, into mammon. That's when you're really caught up in greed. And one point I don't think I made on Sunday, but I think it's worth mentioning, is Richard Foster in The Freedom of Simplicity, the book I did quote on Sunday. He makes the argument some of the greediest people he's ever met are poor people. So like, I think it's helpful for us to remember. And then again, this whole series, we're going to go wrestling with what is poor, what is wealthy. It's such a spectrum. It depends on where you live. In America, we're the top, all of us almost are the top 2% of the global economy. So technically, like when Paul says in 1 Timothy to the wealthy, every pastor, every commentator says, no, this is to all of us in the room. It's not just the one rich person in our church.
The 1% in America or whatever.
It's so that's helpful. But I think it's helpful because I think one way we cannot apply this sermon to our own hearts is, oh, I'm not wealthy, so therefore I'm not greedy. Therefore, these other people need to hear this. But I think Foster says, if you're somebody who just constantly talks about money and thinks about money and just puts their trust in money, and a lot of people put their trust in money because they don't have it, so they're just on this pursuit of finally one day getting it, that is also being caught up in greed that he says cuts the cords of compassion.
Yeah, there's a tough... it is really hard to talk about because I know a lot of times, I mean, growing up, it was all, every time there's a sermon on money or generosity, especially in college, I was really challenged by this when I was in college. I had my college pastor said, if you're spending money, you should be giving money, which is basically like, it doesn't matter how you get it. Cause I was like, look, I don't have a job. My parents give me like a little allowance so I can buy food or whatever, but I can't really give. And he was like, you're spending money, you can give something. And his argument was exactly ours. It was, no, it's not about the church. Like, we don't need your money. Like, our church is not built off of college student tithes.
Yeah.
But this is doing something to you. Like, if you don't build this practice in now. And I think that's hard when you have, like, if your comfort level is determined by your wealth. So, like, even when you have a lot of wealth, you don't think about money necessarily, but like if it's taken or if it's threatened and you have to give up like a third car or you have to downsize your house or whatever, like all of a sudden your world shatters. Or vice versa. If you're, considered unwealthy or poor, however you would label yourself, the temptation to like feel like you've made it and to reach comfort that's based on like fitting into a certain tax bracket is like a symbol of greed. Like that's pointing to something in you that's driving you to live for stability in something that is not actually stable and that it's going to enslave you. And I think that's Jesus' point in Luke 16. You can't serve God and money because it's a master. Like you're going to bend your knee to something.
I don't know why it never jumped out to me, but when I was studying Luke 16, verse 14, I had to include, the point was verse 13, you can't serve both masters, but I loved how Luke recorded the Pharisees' response, that they were lovers of money, and so they were sneering and scoffing at Jesus. Yeah. And I know that's what a lot of pastors fear when they talk about money, because they're worried about the sneering and scoffing, and that does happen. Even those who are like faithfully attending church, they can get really turned off. And so I wasn't as forthright, which I think is okay. But like there is a sense in reading that passage where we can say to our people, hey, if you're offended that we're even doing this series, greed may have a hold on your heart more than you know. And I know some people who are generous that I've talked to, specifically outside of our church, that they're so pumped for me to be doing this series because they're like, this has changed my life and I love it. Thank you for doing this. And I just want all of our people to get to that it's not this taboo topic. It's not like, oh, we have to do it. Like, oh, it's such a joy, which again, I think we'll really address when I kind of mention the gospel patrons, which is in a couple weeks. But let me address this too. Because I felt the critic in my mind, because I do believe this when I told our people yesterday, this is an invitation and you don't have to give to our church. I can't go so far as to say we don't. See, this is where it's hard. This is all semantics, but let's work this through. Because you just said we don't need your money. Technically, we would not be able to meet if everybody didn't give. Like if not a single person gave to our church, literally we couldn't even rent the space, let alone all of that. So I don't want to look dishonest when I say we don't need your money, because we do need money, but you help articulate what I mean by that. You know what I'm saying? Because there's a reality, nothing's free. Yeah. But also what am I trying to say when I say that?
When I said that, I was saying that's what my college pastor had said. So the church that I was at.
But I essentially said that yesterday too.
Yeah, they were funded a different way.
Oh,
to
true.
Where they were supported in a way
because they knew this was a college ministry.
It was a college ministry. We're not going to depend on the college. So they had so his whole point was like, we're okay.
He could literally say that.
Yeah, exactly.
In his context.
Yeah. And he said that several times, but their whole point again was like over and over again, is if you don't give, it's going to do do something to you. It's going to deform you. You have no idea. You're in college now. So that's not what you said on Sunday was basically like, and I think I took it as like you saying, hey, first step is to give, maybe not to our church yet. If you don't trust us, that's fine. Give to something you do trust. So I read that more as like, we're going to talk about why giving to a local church is important and why that.
Okay.
But for this first step, just get it in your system to start giving something away, that kind of thing.
Yeah. In other words, a big win is if you took this practice, this series, and you come to our church and you're giving to someone or something, we're very pumped. We're very grateful if you begin to give to us. But if I was given the choice, hey, this person's not going to give at all, or he's going to give to or she is going to give an organization that's not yours. Have them give to something that's not ours. I'd rather them do that than not give at all, because this is what followers of Jesus do. I think we'll probably address this on the tithing week. Like, how much should you give to your local church? Even funny enough, like I said, when I was in college, I technically wasn't giving to my church that I was pastoring, or I wasn't a pastor then, I was a youth director, that I was directing because of, I saw certain needs at my home church. So I'm trying to make sure we don't try to cover the whole thing week by week. We're kind of giving these breadcrumbs, but that's helpful. Like, we mean that, you don't have to give to us. If you don't trust us, just don't give to us.
Yeah, I would say too, like, and I hope even by you saying that, I don't know if this is weird to say, but like, I hope you gained some trust. Like, I hope, because it's easy.
That's what I fear, that it looks manipulative.
No. I think, and here's what I would say too, is if you never get to that point where you trust us, like if you never want to give to us because you don't trust us, then like,
I go somewhere else.
Go to a different church. It's like what we say with the leadership. If you don't trust our leadership, I don't blame you. I get it.
Yeah.
But go somewhere where you do trust their leadership.
And we gave a sermon on that when we were looking at 1 Timothy 2. I think the greatest way to understand if someone is your pastor or not, what did I say? Motivational speakers reassure you, but pastors redirect you. Are you giving them permission to redirect? So you're saying that's like, oh, you're trusting me as your pastor. If you don't trust our church to where you can give to the funds, I would also argue likely there is less of that suspicion in our context. We don't have a building. We're obviously not like, I'm not rolling up in a Beamer. I'm not
driving in a Bugatti.
Like I have a Ghetto V that I drive and I love it. And praying it still stays, even though it's at 250,000. So I also wonder how much of that fear, like, oh, they're judging, or they, but it's like, oh, that's because we've heard other wealthy churches talk about that experience. Are they really thinking about that on us? Because like we're in a port, like if we had money, we'd have a building,
Yeah, I think it's tough too, because I often think of like, so I have a few thoughts on that. I don't know, maybe we can take this a different direction if you don't like what I say, which is fine. I think a couple things. One is the transparency is always better. So like if we did have something, I don't want to hide it. Like I don't want to hide that I'm considering buying a new laptop right now.
Good point.
Because this is 7 years old and it's starting to like bail on me. And I feel weird about that. And I'm trying to work through that. But the other thing too is like, when I look at our culture and the city that we're in, I do see a culture, and this is why simplicity was so hard. I see a little bit of a culture of like consumption and excess, to where I think people would expect us to spend our money that way. So there is something maybe about us wisely, sort of the Benedictine option of like, we're gonna zig where the culture zags. If they expect us to spend our money this way, maybe we should be careful not to spend our money that way.
Yeah.
So like, buying a laptop is one thing, buying a brand new car. Like I bet a lot of people in our church wouldn't maybe not have an issue with that, because it's like, oh, that's what I would do with my money.
Sure.
But I think there is
some
some
if you
wisdom.
do that, it makes me feel less guilty.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
and that's a tough, we can
it's
go
so
all day.
tough. And that's why you can't point to the Bible and like point and verse. When is a laptop too expensive?
Sure,
when is a car too much? So I'm hoping we kind of address that, but that's kind of, there's a beautiful freedom.
Yeah.
And it's a trap, because you can just explain your way out of any situation.
Yeah.
You can say why you deserve a Lamborghini, because like the one argument that I hear, I'm like, somebody made the Lamborghini, so they're getting paid. So I am supporting these workers. You know
I'm supporting my local, your local Italian.
But because I do think, and maybe we'll talk about this next week some more, is there is such a thing as being stingy, and we shouldn't be stingy. Like, I think you should buy good things. Like a good example is my wife, for like a year, she kept buying stupid, cheap iPhone cases because she felt bad spending money. And I'm like, babe, let's look. You've actually spent more money buying 18 terrible cases than just one beautiful OtterBox or whatever, like let's spend money on things that will last. And it's okay to, like your laptop, you need a good laptop, not a PC.
Yeah.
You need a Mac.
You need a Mac.
You know what I'm saying?
Thank you. No. I fully agree. Yeah.
So that's where I think like we just have to think wise about this. Or like I spend a lot of money on books. That's a worthy investment. It's helping us with our preaching and this and that and the other. So I want to make like also, man, I'm going to go on a rant here, but I just want to make sure we're not misunderstood. But I also realize part of pastoral ministry is being misunderstood and being okay with that.
Yeah.
But like, I think it's okay to have nice things, and I think it's okay to go on nice trips. But also, there is a way where that's a trap. There is a way where, like Richard Foster said, hey, there are people starving, and yet you just spent an extra $1,000 on sushi. That's a dramatic example. But like at some point we go, yeah, maybe I shouldn't spend that. One more thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I was thinking about, I'm trying to learn. This is the most embarrassing. This is the most embarrassing admission I've ever given on this podcast. But I know you're with me.
Okay.
So I don't know.
Drag me in.
Oh, I'm dragging you in.
All right.
I don't know how to change my own oil.
Oh yeah, I don't. Yeah.
See?
I mean, yeah.
So
I mean, I know how. I just choose not to support my local mechanics. But
no, that's the point. That's the point I was going to make. At some point, no, you don't. So at some point though, because I was reading about Jewish communities, and they're adamant. I'm not going to learn how to change my oil because I'm robbing the person in my community who changes oil, and they're feeding their family because of his skill. So there is something to where it's like, I think there needs to be a frugal season of life. You're way in debt over your head. Yeah, learn how to do all these things on your own. But maybe there's a point in your life where it's like, yeah, I could paint the house myself over the span of a month, or I could hire this family that's really trying to get going and they're incredible people. Yeah, I'm going to pay them. And that's why I like support local too. Like, hey, let's support these mom and pop shops. So I think there needs to be like a generous worldview of like, you know what, I could do this myself to save money, or I can bless my neighbor and make sure that their family has food on the plate tonight. And again, you can't like scientifically say, here's when it's too far, here's when it's not enough. But there's something about that I think needs to be introduced in these conversations.
Yeah. So to kind of redirect this back, to apply all that to what we were saying yesterday, I think that's probably why we started to give language to all of this. I think it would have been easy for us to start a generosity series with what we're going to do in a couple weeks, the gospel patron kind of thing, to say like, look at what God can do when you give, stewardship, that kind of thing. But our drive, like our heartbeat, and I would say this for us too, like our genuine desire, we do want you to give to our church. Like we do want you to practice generosity so that, because I think there are things, like you said, that we want to do as a church that we just can't unless people see themselves as stewards and participate in the kingdom with their finances. There's opportunities
we can't do because of it. Absolutely.
But the starting point is to not give, to not practice generosity.
It's not neutral.
It's not neutral. Like it's doing, just like all of these, like it's doing something to your soul that is keeping you, not just keeping you, but killing you on the inside. It's a false god. It's poisoning you. It's infecting your eye, like Jesus says in Luke 11. All of these things. So like, if you never give to our church, that's between you and God, whatever. But please give to. That's why we said the starting point is greed. You have to address that before you address anything. So
that's why we said week 1, disciples, not donors, because we can present a whole generosity series as you need to donate to this cause that we have. You need to donate to this building fund. And I'm not going to lie. If we had like a legitimate opportunity to build a building, I have no problem saying we're going to have a building fund. We just don't have one at this moment.
Yeah.
So there's nothing sinful about me saying, hey, let's do a series. And it's about, let's remind ourselves why we're giving sacrificially to this thing. But we don't have that, at least not at this point. I pray that we do. I pray that the great opportunity comes. Lord, let it be. But more importantly, is like, this is a hard issue. So we're not like our big goal. And this is what's hard about this practice. And we've already said this. I think of the hospitality practice, we were able to see if it works or not because we made a visual with ping pong balls.
Yeah.
But we always have that, well, maybe they did it and they didn't put the ping pong ball in, that's fine. And in the same way in generosity, maybe they're giving to other people, not us. But there is like this fleshly temptation, like to condemn myself at the end of this 4 weeks and be like, look, we didn't even have a single bump in our giving.
Yeah.
Like my communication sucks. Like we're setting ourselves up kind of for that disappointment.
Yeah. And I think as we'll go on and we kind of, these first 2 weeks are a little more
heart, and then
yeah.
the last two are very hands,
Practical.
a lot more practical.
In the last 2 weeks, the practices, there's going to be a few different levels of how to practice generosity. So I think for some people, like, who have never lived off of or made a budget, for example, like that's going to be a first step that, like, maybe we don't see, you know, like
In the beginning,
compound effect of maybe
Yes.
people kind of, it'll take some time, just like all of this. But yeah, I do think there's a real fair. And again, it's behind the scenes, kind of peek behind the curtain. When the conversation we're always having as we talk through these practices to prep for them and everything is how do we gauge how successful we are? What's our metric for gauging if we're successful, if this is doing anything? And I think on some level, you can't really have a metric for that. We'll never really know where people's hearts are at. We can try to lead people where what we've experienced and hope they follow. But also, like, there's a lot of, you know, this is why we push groups so much, is like, it'll help as groups start back up again, as you're wrestling with these ideas. Like, if we can get some people to think through what it means to give for the first time, maybe they've never considered that. Like, that's a win to me.
Yeah.
If we can think through what, if somebody's thinking through for the first time, like how to give beyond systematically into like sacrificial giving, that's a win. If somebody just starts thinking about money for the first time, or maybe they haven't, like, that's a win.
Yeah, I remember our deacon of finance said a couple years ago, he's like, I was really encouraged because this one person, he didn't say who, but he's like, this one person decided to give $10 a week. He's like, I thought that was such a great sign, because some people would think, it's just $10. I'm just not going to give it all because that's not much. And it's like, no, that's amazing. Like, cool. You're now giving $10, $40 a month that you weren't giving before. That's a win. Now, if you were to look at just from the perspective of tithing, there's no way you're surviving off of $400 a month and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, okay, well, you can look that way and legalistically get really judgmental really fast. Or we can say, hey, this person could have kept it zero, but he took one step. And I do think that would be great for our people. How are we taking a step? Do you know the stats, what the average American gives? Because we think, you know, which is a whole, I guess we're stepping into week 4 too much.
A little bit.
But I'll just say it real quick for those who would get bothered if we just left it. We assume, and I think those who tithe assume everybody else tithes, which is fine. Keep thinking that. We assume tithing means 10%. So those who give think, oh yeah, everybody at this church gives 10%. The average in an evangelical church in America, do you know the percentage?
I read it. We've talked about it before, but I forgot.
2.3%. Yeah. So they give on average 2.3. And even using that, it's like, I don't want to use this as condemning language. This is why so many people just avoid this talk, because there is easy ways the enemy can use this to condemn the listener, to condemn the preacher, and we're just going to keep going because it's a discipleship issue. Generosity says in the back of our booklet, generosity is central, not incidental, to being formed by Jesus. And why? Week 1 was, look, if we aren't generous, greed will take over. And guess what? Greed is serving the God of mammon. And Jesus says you cannot serve both God and mammon. So there it is. If you're a disciple, you are generous. Because if you're not generous, you're caught up in greed.
Yeah.
Now, all of the different details of what does it mean to be generous, who should be you should be generous towards, that's a whole nother thing. Let's answer some of the questions. Unless there's somewhere else you wanted to veer off to.
No, I was just going to say, I think the bottom line is like what that stat tells me isn't condemning or whatever, but I think it does tell me like letting go of your money, no matter how much or little of it you have, is harder than you think. And that's kind of the point of this first message. So,
the other thought I had too was we're the richest country in like all time, and we find this hard to follow. Paul said this to a group of people who were poor and said, give 10%. So, or actually one would argue he didn't say that. So, but
Come back for week 4.
Come back for week 4, but at least maybe 10%. So anyways, okay, go ahead to the questions.
Yeah, we got a few questions in, which, by the way, please send them in. You can, I guess,
comment or DM.
Comment, DM, email, whatever. We'd love to kind of help answer some of these questions. One that I thought was really good was someone basically asked about the difference between giving sacrificially, because we have that in our language kind of later on.
Even on Sunday.
Yeah, so... how would you consider giving time versus giving money? I don't want to read this kind of word for word, but they said maybe it's a different category than generosity to give time. Maybe it's more akin to like something like serving, which I would argue is a different practice.
Yeah.
But we prioritize giving a tithe as well as extra giving when they feel prompted. basically they said,
You're doing a great job summarizing this
I know,
to make sure you're not
I feel
saying
like
who this is, because this person probably wants to be private.
I assume all these want. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going to name anybody unless you subscribe, and then I will. Just kidding. I feel like you could make an argument that we are sacrificing in our giving by serving extra time, things like that. So
Okay.
summarize that in better language.
Let me take a shot at it, and then I want to hear you. This reminds me of our next practice after this, which is so exciting, is fasting.
Yeah.
And when we talk about fasting, it's all centered around food, because we would argue abstaining from social media is different than fasting. Fasting is directed to food. So I would say, as a general rule, generosity should first and foremost be equated to your resources. In modern day vernacular, it's money. That's our form of currency. In the back of the day, it would be trading. So you'd think more resources rather than coins. But the reason I say it should start there is because you can quickly wiggle yourself out of ever giving your money in the name of giving your time and your talents. I like how you just mentioned, because I'm thinking of 1 Peter talking about the different gifts that people have. And he says, the gift of serving. Serving would be under the category of being generous with your time. But it's serving. That's servanthood. So I think, yes, I have no problem saying that person is generous with their time. That person, they're so generous. They spend 6 hours a week at church. They're generous people in that way. But I don't think you can be a generous person if you're stingy with your resources. What do you think?
Yeah, I would point back to, again, the whole foundation for yesterday's message, which is like, you can definitely be generous with your time, and that is a form of being generous and of giving. But what we're after specifically is to target the poison of greed. And you can definitely be greedy with your time as well, but that's called selfishness. And I think greed that word mammon is specifically related to your money, your possessions.
Good point.
So like,
there's no wiggling out of mammon.
These are two different things. Like there's something about the money, whether again, you have a little of it or a lot of it, it doesn't matter, that is attaching itself to your heart.
Yeah.
And you have to fight against that thing. That won't go away by you serving more. The only way, and I think I wrote this in the guide, the only way to free ourselves from the enslavement of greed is to give our money away, basically.
If I could be honest, I have seen people get caught up in the trap of greed, but they would always excuse themselves. I'm so generous with my time, I don't have to be generous with my money. And I'm just seeing us stepping into these traps. Like, we are very patient with people, and I think it's like, yeah, that's a huge good first step. If you're generous with your time first, wonderful. At some point, we're praying that God works on you and you're now generous with your treasure, as some would say. But yeah, praise the Lord. Like, you went from nothing to this. So we're always trying to say we're all in different ages and stages of maturity. But with that language, you can then use that as an excuse to never grow here. And so we want to make sure we're at least making you feel uncomfortable. Because like, what did Jesus do with the rich young ruler? He could have said, you know what? You're doing all these other things fine. It's okay that you have greed. No, he says, no, you got to sell your possessions and give it all to the poor and then follow me. So we have to be faithful to Jesus in how we preach this. So yes, you can be generous with your time, but don't let that, it doesn't make up for not being generous with your resource.
It's like you're treating a different issue entirely. Like if you have a broken foot and a broken finger, like if you treat the broken finger, it's not like your foot is better now. It's a completely different thing. So,
and that's why I do think percentage giving is helpful, because it's like it can be applied to any socioeconomic status. 10% is 10%. Again, we're stepping into week 4, but so that is also a beautiful thing, is the proportionate giving. Okay. Is there any other way we should answer that?
Two more. One of them I think we'll save for the last week on tithing. There's actually a couple on tithing that I think would be good. One that right before we recorded, I said I think I need more time on this, so I'm going to throw this out there. And if you have,
let's give ourselves permission to answer it again later.
We'll answer it again later. Is the cultural norm of retirement biblical? Just a general curiosity.
Well, you don't see the phrase retirement in the scriptures.
So no.
Do we? I do think it's a more recent phenomenon. I do think part of that understanding of retirement. So I know people who they are only working so they can retire. That's their whole goal. And the problem with that is, man, what's the Hebrew word for work? I think it starts with an H or something.
I'll look it up.
Okay. But work is a gift from God. In fact, Adam and Eve were working in the garden before the fall. So we know that work is a gift. It's how we contribute to the kingdom. It's how we supply the needs for our family. And so I'd be fearful of people just viewing job as just their job and they hate it, but at least it makes me money. So I would try to expand your horizons. But at the same time, I know people who've used their retirement well. In my mind, the people who have used their retirement to the glory of God is they now use their time to serve more, to be a part of the ministry. So John Piper had that famous sermon at Passion 2001 or 99 or whatever, and it was seashells.
Seashells, yeah.
Right? And so it's this whole idea of like, are we really living our lives so that we can retire, so that we can collect seashells on the seashore? No, and then it's that whole don't waste your life came from let's live for something much bigger. So I would argue your life, man, God created you for such a bigger eternal impact than to just like vacation once you retire and hopefully retire early. But again, I know other people that retired and they're using their time so well in investing in the next generation and serving the church for free because they can. So there can be blessings, just like anything. It can be a gift or it can definitely turn into a God.
Yeah. I just think that there's a lot of...
We did a whole workplace workshop. How do I not remember the Hebrew
I'm
phrase
not. I mean,
for
I'm
work?
finding a different
Keep going.
word.
Go ahead.
Yeah, you can look it up. Yeah, I think that's a great starting point. Is the work. I think how the Bible would define work needs to be broadened beyond just your occupation, just what you get paid to do. Because I would consider. I mean, and we know this. Anybody who has children knows that like raising kids is just as like hard and as like valuable and as hard work as like getting paid for something. So like if you only consider work something that you get paid for, then I think you're missing how God designed work to like be a part of the functional flow of creation. Some sort of productivity is probably a better way to think about it. And so like when you look at in the garden, Adam and Eve are told to cultivate the world, have dominion over it, basically like tame creation, rule creation. Like there's a functional purpose to Adam and Eve existing. And it's not just to enjoy the garden. It's also to cultivate it and to make it better and to produce and to use sort of maybe New Testament language, like to help kind of bring the kingdom down to earth as well. In the garden, this would have been more like expanding the garden, but then the fall happens and then heaven and earth kind of get split and it's a whole thing. So I think, yeah, that's a great warning. Work has to include more than just what you get paid for. In retirement, I think that the model of like how a church should function involves older, wiser, second half of life people investing in younger generations of Christians and things like that, which can also be considered work. So like, I'm all for retirement from like your occupation
9 to 5.
if you have the privilege to do that. Also, not a lot of people have that ability. So if you have the privilege to do that, I think that's great, but you have to really still just kind of fight off that sort of selfishness and the abandonment of like your purpose, which is to kind of still fill the earth, cultivate it.
It's not for the God of pleasure.
Yeah, exactly.
Avodah is the Hebrew phrase.
Okay.
So the Hebrews would argue avodah has 3 circles,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Meanings. Remember that talk we did on Ecclesiastes? So one, your work is worship. So you work hard as unto the Lord. You see that in Exodus 8. You see it in Colossians 3. Mm-hmm. And in worship, work is service. So you're doing it to build others up, to serve your household, but also to contribute to your community, the overall flourishing. And then work is supposed to be a calling. It should flow from your purpose, your gift, your skill, what gives you energy. And so those 3 put together make it... I don't think you ever press pause on that. I think you retire sometimes to stop one job, but now it makes you step further into another calling that's filled with service and worship. So I think we're always going to be doing that, and I would argue we're still going to be working in heaven, in the new king, the new heavens and new earth. Like, we're going to be actively doing and creating.
It's
not going to be with the curse, but just with joy.
Yeah, not toilsome, but serving a purpose beyond. And I think that's the end. Like, God's call on your life is not, you're right, hedonism.
Yes.
God is a God of pleasure for sure, but he's not like a pleasure God. Like the end goal of your existence as a human being is not just to be able to sit back and relax and enjoy your life and be happy, which not that those are bad things. Like relaxation's good, rest is important, things like that. But within the rhythm of like being productive, cultivating, creating joyfully, kind of expanding the kingdom. Yeah.
So 2 books I want to suggest today. So we actually have 6 or 7 books on the recommended reads at the end of the booklet, but 2 books I want to mention today. The first one, have you read this yet? Neither Poverty Nor Riches.
Not that one yet, no.
It's by Craig Blomberg. It's a heady, heavy read. In fact, I would probably argue the best way to read this is you can kind of jump around. Like, oh, this chapter, I want to know what the Old Testament wisdom and prophetic literature say about giving. But the intro and conclusion are worth the price of admission. What I love about this book, I think I'm going to mention it here in week 2, is a biblical overview of money. And then also a biblical overview of different ways people give. So this is a very like thick read in the sense of hard to understand. But one book that I think you can enjoy, that it's maybe not even on the recommended read, but I think it'll help you in preparing for the God of Abundance section, which we actually quote this book in the booklet, is Life Without Lack. And what's helpful about that book is it's a meditation on Psalm 23. And it's just so much of when we talk about generosity, it's because we assume it's hard for us to be generous when we have a life with lack, when we assume God isn't for me. Psalm 23, right? The Lord is my shepherd. I have what I need, or I shall not want. And so we're trying to get to the heart of that in these first two Sundays.
Yeah. I've read Life Without Lack. It's great. I think we'll really unpack that because I think it's hard to see just when you start talking about generosity, the connection between greediness and scarcity.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be good to kind of connect those dots next week.
You excited for us to talk about prosperity and poverty gospel?
I've been waiting. No, not really. I'm pretty excited, a little nervous.
I think those who are like really caught up in online world are excited, but some normal people are like, what gospel? What are you talking about?
I think it's going to be hard not to keep having this conversation about how it applies to us too. Like where's the line, all of that stuff. So I'm excited. I do think and I'm curious if we'll address this, but you started off, I think, asking this question, like the driving force of like, God will bless you if you're generous. I know some people only give because of that, because they're like, no, if you want to get more money and be more financially successful, you have to give. And like that might be a true principle in like the proverb sense. Because
today, when I said it's kind of a selfish thing, I think they would assume, being generous gets you money back. We're saying being generous keeps money off of your heart.
Yeah.
But usually the pitch is, hey, tenfold, brother.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that'll come up next week a little bit, and because I think that has hints of the prosperity gospel in it.
Yeah,
that's not a bad reason to give, but if that's your sole reason, that's just why we started.
I have never given with that motivation.
Yeah,
I'm just realizing that
it's a huge. I mean, what is it in? Is it Malachi? What there's a verse.
Test me.
Yeah. Test me on this, God says.
Yeah, the only time He says to test him specifically. That's an interesting passage, because it's like, is that for the old covenant or the new? And
what is He taught? What is the blessing? Like
what is the storehouse?
Yeah, the storehouse.
Oh gosh.
We'll cover it next week.
We only have 4 weeks. It's just amazing because people I love and respect differ on the translation of that.
Yeah.
Like Tim Keller argues the storehouse is just ministry in general.
Yeah.
And it should be 10%. But it doesn't have to be all to the local church. Other people say it's clearly the local church. Other people say this is all old covenant. Tithing shouldn't even be it. What a joy. We're stepping into a lot here.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah. All right. Well, make sure you guys comment your questions. And you're here for the background music. So it's how we begin and end. What is a comment we should have them, or a question, or, we usually give them something.
Yeah. Comment the Hebrew word for work that you found.
Ooh.
Spell it as best you can.
Yes.
But the Hebrew word for work that you said.
Which I can't say it, right? That's a test.
Yeah, I guess.
Yeah. We'll see if our watch time, see if they're scrubbing back now.
Yeah.
All right. Grace and peace.